The scent of pine and smoke clung to my clothes as I hurried through the gathering twilight, my footsteps barely audible against the packed earth of the village path. Autumn had descended upon our territory with unforgiving swiftness, bringing with it the kind of biting cold that seeped through layers of wool and settled in your bones. Tonight was the harvest moon ceremony, the most sacred ritual of our pack, and for the first time in my 22 years, I had been summoned to attend. Not that anyone particularly wanted me there. I clutched the silver pendant that hung around my neck, my mother's final gift before she disappeared into the forest 5 winters ago, never to return. The delicate crescent moon etched into its surface had long been my talisman, my silent companion through countless nights of solitude. "Remember who you are," she had whispered as she'd pressed it into my palm, "even when the world tries to tell you otherwise." The distant beat of drums grew louder as I approached the ceremonial clearing. Flames from the massive bonfire licked at the darkening sky, casting long shadows that danced between ancient oak trees. Pack members moved about with purpose, their voices a chorus of excitement and reverence. They wore their finest clothes, adorned with symbolic tokens of status and lineage, things I had never possessed. I hesitated at the edge of the clearing, my breath forming small clouds in the frigid air. As the pack's healer's apprentice, and a peculiarity among our kind for my inability to shift, I typically spent these gatherings grinding herbs in the medicine hut, far from scrutinizing gazes and whispered judgments. Being unable to transform into my wolf form had marked me as defective from birth. My fair hair, unusual in our predominantly dark-haired pack, only emphasized my otherness. "Cora." The voice made me flinch. Beta Dominic, second in command to our Alpha King, stood beside me, his imposing figure blocking what little warmth the bonfire offered. His expression, as always when addressing me, was a careful mask of neutrality that never quite concealed his disdain. "You're late," he said, surveying me from head to toe with a critical eye, "and dressed like you're heading to gather mushrooms rather than attend the most sacred ceremony of the year." I glanced down at my simple gray dress and worn leather boots. He wasn't wrong. I wasn't aware there was a dress code for outcasts. His jaw tightened. In the firelight, the scar that ran from his temple to his jaw looked like a river of shadow. "Mind your tongue. You're here by the Alpha King's command, not by right." "Why?" I dared to ask, though the question had been burning inside me since I'd received the summons that morning. Why would King Orion want me here? He barely acknowledges my existence. Dominic's lips curled into a smirk that sent ice through my veins. "The Alpha King wants to see you," he said, each word deliberate and weighted, "and I suggest you prepare yourself for what that might mean." Before I could respond, he gripped my elbow and steered me toward the inner circle, where the pack's highest-ranking members gathered. Heads turned as we approached. Conversations stuttered and died. Eyes that reflected the firelight like those of predators tracked our movement with unconcealed curiosity. The crowd parted, and for the first time in years, I found myself standing before King Orion. He sat upon a throne carved from a single massive oak trunk, his powerful frame draped in ceremonial furs that emphasized rather than concealed his strength. At 32, he had ruled our territory for a decade, with unflinching authority since the death of his father. His reputation for both justice and merciless retribution had expanded our borders and brought unprecedented prosperity. Packs from across the continent sent envoys seeking alliance and offering daughters in marriage. Yet he remained unmated, a fact that fueled endless speculation among the unmated females of our pack. I kept my gaze lowered, as was proper, but could feel the weight of his stare like a physical touch. The silence stretched until it seemed to swallow the crackling of the fire and the distant hooting of owls. "Leave us," he finally commanded, his deep voice resonating in my chest. Dominic hesitated. "My king, the ceremony. We'll wait." The finality in those two words could have shattered stone. The beta inclined his head and stepped back, gesturing for others to retreat. Within moments, a circle of empty space surrounded us, though I could feel dozens of eyes watching from the shadows beyond the fire's reach. "Look at me, Cora." I raised my chin, meeting his gaze directly for the first time in my adult life. His eyes were the color of amber in sunlight, with a ring of gold around his pupils that seemed to flare in the firelight. They held none of the contempt I'd grown accustomed to seeing in others. Instead, I found something far more terrifying: interest. "Do you know why you're here?" he asked, leaning forward slightly. I swallowed. "No, Your Majesty." 3 nights ago, a scout from the Northern Ridge Pack was found dead at our borders, he said, watching me closely. His throat was torn out, but not by wolf claws. The killing was unusual. My hands trembled. I clasped them tightly together to still them. "I don't understand what this has to do with me." "Don't you?" He rose from his throne in one fluid motion and stepped toward me. Though I was tall for a woman, he towered over me, forcing me to tilt my head back to maintain eye contact. "Old Mara says you have visions. That sometimes, when you touch objects belonging to others, you see things you shouldn't." Heat rushed to my face. My occasional glimpses into the past or future were abilities I'd tried desperately to hide, another abnormality in a life defined by them. That the ancient healer had betrayed my confidence to the Alpha King himself felt like a blade between my ribs. "They're unreliable," I whispered. "Fragments at best. Yet you predicted the flood that nearly destroyed the eastern village last spring," he countered. "And the illness that struck the pups in winter. You prepared the remedy before the first symptoms appeared." I said nothing. There was no point denying what he clearly already knew. He reached into a pouch at his belt and withdrew something wrapped in cloth. 3 more scouts have vanished in the past month. Whatever killed the Northern Ridge wolf may still be hunting in our territory." He unwrapped the cloth, revealing a jagged piece of dark metal. "This was embedded in the dead scout's chest. I want you to touch it." Fear jolted through me. I can't control what I see, if I see anything at all. Try. It wasn't a request. With trembling fingers, I reached for the metal fragment. The moment my skin made contact, the world around me disappeared in a rush of darkness and blood. A figure moving through moonlight, too fast for human eyes to track. The scent of decay and something ancient. Eyes that glowed not with the amber of wolves, but with an unholy blue light. Teeth sharper than any wolf's, tearing through flesh, a symbol carved into tree bark, a warning or a claim. And beneath it all, a hunger that could never be satisfied. I jerked away with a gasp, nearly stumbling backward. King Orion's hand shot out, gripping my arm to steady me. The contact sent another shock through my system. Not a vision this time, but something equally disorienting. A warmth that spread from his touch and settled low in my belly. "What did you see?" he demanded. "Not wolves," I managed, my voice barely audible even to my own ears. "Something else. Something older. They're hunting in our territory, using the borders as their feeding grounds." His grip tightened. "They?" I nodded, the horror of my vision still fresh. "Vampires. I thought they were just stories to frighten pups, but..." I met his gaze. "They're real. And they're getting bolder." For a heartbeat, something like fear flickered across his face. Gone so quickly I might have imagined it. Then his expression hardened into cold determination. "The treaty has been broken," he said, more to himself than to me. His eyes refocused on my face with startling intensity. "You will attend me tomorrow at dawn. We ride to the eastern border." "Me?" I couldn't keep the shock from my voice. "But I'm not a warrior. I can't even shift." The corner of his mouth lifted in what might have been a smile on anyone else. On him, it looked dangerous. "You have other gifts. Gifts we need." His gaze dropped to the pendant at my throat, lingering there before rising again to my eyes. "Your mother knew what you would become. It's time you discovered it too." He released my arm and stepped back. "Dominic will escort you to your quarters. Rest well, Cora. Tomorrow your life changes." As if summoned by thought alone, the beta materialized from the shadows. The expression on his face as he looked between his king and me confirmed what I already suspected. Whatever was happening, whatever role I was being pulled into, it was unprecedented and likely unwelcome to many. "Come," Dominic said curtly. As he led me away from the fire, away from the Alpha whose gaze I could still feel burning into my back, a strange certainty settled over me. The pendant seemed heavier against my skin, as though my mother's final gift had been waiting for this moment all along. "Remember who you are," her voice whispered in my memory. I just wished I knew who that was supposed to be. Sleep eluded me that night. I tossed and turned in my small bed, my mind racing with fragments of the vision and the unsettling awareness of what dawn would bring. The quarters Dominic had escorted me to weren't my humble healer's apprentice hut at the village edge, but a chamber within the pack house itself, a space reserved for those in the Alpha's inner circle or distinguished guests. The sudden elevation in my status felt precarious, like standing on thin ice over a frozen lake. When the first pale fingers of dawn crept through the window, I was already dressed and waiting, my few possessions packed in a worn leather satchel. I had no illusions about this journey. Whatever awaited at the eastern border would irrevocably alter the course of my existence. Whether that change would destroy me or forge me into something stronger remained to be seen. A soft knock at the door startled me from my thoughts. "Enter," I called, expecting Dominic or perhaps a servant sent to fetch me. Instead, a young woman with auburn hair and kind eyes stepped into the room. Elise, the pack's record keeper and one of the few who had ever shown me kindness. "I thought you might need these," she said, placing a bundle of clothing on the bed. "Riding clothes. More suitable for a journey than what you have." I touched the soft leather and sturdy fabric with gratitude. "Thank you, but why?" "Not everyone sees you as cursed, Cora," she interrupted, her voice gentle but firm. "Some of us have been waiting." "Waiting for what?" She smiled enigmatically. "For the Alpha to see what has been in front of him all along." Before I could question her further, she added, "There are rumors spreading through the pack like wildfire that you're being taken as his mate." The absurdity of the suggestion made me laugh, though the sound held little humor. "That's ridiculous. He needs my abilities, whatever they are. Nothing more." Elise looked unconvinced. "Perhaps. But King Orion has never shown interest in any female before, let alone commanded their presence at his side during a diplomatic mission. This is hardly diplomatic," I countered, thinking of the blood and death in my vision. "And I doubt the Alpha King would choose a defective mate who can't even shift." Her expression softened with compassion that made my chest ache. "Your worth isn't measured by your ability to shift, Cora. There are older magics in your blood, gifts that come from somewhere beyond our wolf nature." I stared at her. "How could you possibly know that? Your mother told mine, before she left." Elise reached out and touched the crescent pendant at my throat. "She said when the time came, you would need to remember that you carry the moon's blessing, not its curse." The word struck me like a physical blow. I had spent so long believing myself diminished, less than, broken, when perhaps I had simply been different all along. Before I could press Elise for more information about what my mother had shared, heavy footsteps echoed in the corridor outside. "Ready yourself," she whispered, squeezing my hand. "And remember, courage isn't about being fearless, it's about facing what terrifies you." She slipped out just as Dominic appeared at the doorway, his imposing figure blocking the morning light. His gaze fell to the riding clothes on the bed, then returned to my face with narrowed eyes. "The king awaits," he said flatly. "You have 5 minutes." When he closed the door, I changed quickly into the riding clothes Elise had brought. Dark trousers, a fitted tunic, and a hooded cloak lined with fur. All were of quality I had never worn before, and though clearly made for someone of similar height, they had been hastily altered to fit my more slender frame. I braided my fair hair and tucked the pendant safely beneath my tunic, its familiar weight against my skin, offering small comfort. The courtyard bustled with activity when I emerged. A small contingent of warriors, the Alpha's elite guard, prepared horses and checked weapons. Among them, standing a head taller than the rest, King Orion cut an imposing figure in his riding leathers and fur-trimmed cloak. Unlike the ceremonial finery of the previous night, his current attire was made for battle, reinforced with subtle armor and adorned with symbols of his status and strength. Our eyes met across the distance, and something electric passed between us, causing my breath to catch. A moment later, his attention shifted to an approaching warrior, but the brief connection left me unsettled. "You'll ride with the king," Dominic's voice came from behind me, making me jump. "Surely I can manage my own horse," I protested, the thought of being in such close proximity to Orion for hours on end both terrifying and something else I refused to examine. Dominic's lips thinned. "The pace will be grueling, and we can't afford delays. You'll ride with him." He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Whatever game you're playing, little witch, I suggest caution. The king's interest in you may be temporary, but the resentment of others could be permanent." His warning was hardly necessary. I was well acquainted with the pack's resentment, having lived with it my entire life. "I didn't ask for this," I said quietly. Something like surprise flickered across his face before his expression hardened once more. "Few of us ask for our fate. We merely endure it." With that cryptic statement, he gripped my elbow and steered me toward the waiting party. As we approached, conversation died away. Eyes, some curious, others openly hostile, followed our progress across the courtyard. I kept my gaze fixed on the cobblestones beneath my feet, fighting the urge to shrink into myself as I had so often done in the past. "Cora." King Orion's deep voice sent a shiver down my spine. I looked up to find him standing before me, his massive black stallion pawing at the ground behind him. In the clear light of morning, I could better see the details of his face. The straight nose, the strong jaw darkened with stubble, the slight crinkles at the corners of his eyes that suggested he might once have smiled easily before the burden of leadership had settled on his shoulders. "Your Majesty," I managed, inclining my head in what I hoped was an appropriate show of respect. "You slept well?" he asked, though his tone suggested it was mere formality rather than genuine concern. "Yes, thank you." The lie came easily. Years of hiding weakness had made me proficient in small deceptions. His eyes, those unsettlingly perceptive amber eyes, lingered on the shadows beneath mine. But he merely nodded. "Good. We have a long journey ahead." He turned to his horse and mounted in one fluid motion, then extended his hand down to me. "Come." Aware of the many eyes watching, I placed my hand in his. His fingers closed around mine, warm and strong, and with seemingly effortless strength, he pulled me up to sit in front of him on the saddle. The intimacy of the position, my back against his chest, his arms encircling me to hold the reins, sent heat rushing to my face. "Hold tight," he murmured, his breath warm against my ear. Before I could respond, he urged the stallion forward, and we were moving through the gates and out into the forest beyond the village. The rest of the party fell in behind us, hooves thundering on the packed earth as we set a pace that seemed deliberately calculated to prevent conversation. For hours we rode in silence, pushing deeper into territory I had never seen before. The forest grew denser, older, the trees towering monoliths that blocked out much of the sky. Occasionally, I caught glimpses of wildlife, a doe and her fawn startling away from our approach, a hawk circling overhead, a fox slipping silently between the underbrush. Each time, a pang of envy struck me. These creatures moved with a natural grace and purpose that I had always longed for in my human form, knowing I would never experience the freedom of my wolf. "You're tense," the alpha said suddenly, breaking the hours-long silence. "Relax. I won't let you fall." I hadn't realized how rigidly I was holding myself until he pointed it out. Consciously, I tried to loosen my muscles, but the awareness of his solid warmth behind me made it nearly impossible. "It's not the riding I'm concerned about," I admitted. "Then what?" I hesitated. Honesty with the alpha was dangerous, yet something told me he would see through any lie I attempted. Everything. This journey. Why I'm here. What you expect from me. His arms tightened slightly around me as he guided the horse around a fallen log. "I expect you to use your gifts to help protect our pack," he said after a moment. "Beyond that, we shall see." The ambiguity of his answer did nothing to calm my nerves. "And if my gifts fail?" I asked, voicing my deepest fear. "If I can't see what you need me to see?" He was quiet for so long I thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, meant for my ears alone despite the distance between us and the rest of the party. Then we face what comes together, as best we can. The simple statement, devoid of threat or accusation, caught me off guard. I twisted slightly in the saddle to look up at his face, searching for any sign of deception. His expression remained impassive, but something in his eyes, a vulnerability perhaps, or a shared uncertainty, made my breath catch. For a moment I saw not the fearsome Alpha King, but a man carrying the weight of his pack's survival on his shoulders. A man who, despite his power, was reaching for whatever advantage he could find, even if that meant putting his faith in the pack's broken outcast. The moment shattered as Dominic rode up alongside us, his expression grim. "Scouts report unusual tracks ahead," he said without preamble. "Similar to what we found near the dead northern ridge wolf." Orion's face immediately hardened back into the mask of leadership I was familiar with. "How fresh?" "Hours, not days," Dominic replied. "They crossed our path heading east, toward the border. The boundary stones," I whispered. A fragment of my vision suddenly crystallizing in my mind. "That's where they'll be." Both men looked at me sharply. "What boundary stones?" Orion demanded. I struggled to articulate what I had seen. Impressions more than clear images. "Ancient markers at the edge of our territory, where 3 packlands meet. There's power there. Old magic." I pressed my fingers to my temples, trying to capture the fleeting insight. "They're using it for something." Dominic's expression darkened with suspicion, but Orion's eyes never left my face. After a moment, he nodded. "The Triad Stones. They've stood for centuries, marking the convergence of our territory with the Eastern Valley and Northern Ridge packs." His gaze shifted to Dominic. "Alert the guards. We make camp 2 miles from the stones and approach on foot after nightfall." "On foot?" Dominic questioned. "If these are vampires, then they'll expect wolves, not humans." Orion cut him off. "And they certainly won't expect her." His chin gestured toward me. Dominic's jaw tightened, but he inclined his head in acquiescence and fell back to relay the orders to the others. We rode in silence once more, but the quality of it had changed. Tension thrummed through the air, and I found myself straining my senses for any sign of danger among the deepening shadows of the forest. As the light began to fade, Orion guided his stallion off the main path into a small clearing nestled between ancient oak trees. The rest of the party followed, dismounting and efficiently setting up a minimal camp. "Stay close," Orion murmured as he lifted me down from the horse, his hands lingering at my waist a heartbeat longer than necessary. "The night brings dangers even for those under an alpha's protection." As twilight deepened into true darkness, I stood at the edge of the camp, watching as the warriors prepared for what might come. They moved with the practiced coordination of those who had faced danger together before, checking weapons, speaking in low voices, occasionally casting glances in my direction. I touched the pendant beneath my tunic, drawing comfort from its familiar shape. Whatever awaited us at the Triad Stones, I sensed it would reveal not just the nature of the threat to our pack, but something fundamental about myself that had remained hidden for 22 years. "Remember who you are," my mother's voice whispered in my memory once more. Tonight, perhaps, I would finally discover who that was meant to be. The forest at night was a different realm. Familiar shapes transformed into looming shadows, ordinary sounds amplified into eerie warnings. We moved as silently as possible through the underbrush, a line of dark figures navigating by starlight, and the wolves' superior night vision. I stayed close behind Orion, hyper-aware of his every movement, my fingers occasionally brushing the back of his cloak when the terrain grew treacherous. Our party had divided, half remaining with the horses, the other half, including Orion, Dominic, and myself, advancing toward the Triad Stones. The warriors had shed their heavier gear, opting for silence over protection, though each still carried weapons of silver and steel. "How much farther?" I whispered to Orion when he paused to survey the path ahead. "Just beyond that rise," he murmured, nodding toward a subtle elevation in the landscape. "The stones stand in a clearing. We'll approach downwind." Dominic materialized beside us like a shadow taking form. "Scouts report no movement yet," he said, his voice barely audible. "But there's a scent. Wrong. Nothing like wolf or human." Orion's jaw tightened. Keep the men in position. No one moves until I give the signal. His gaze shifted to me. Stay at my side. If you see anything, vision or otherwise, tell me immediately. I nodded, swallowing my fear. The closer we drew to our destination, the more a strange tension built within me. It wasn't just anxiety about the potential danger. Something about this place called to me, like a half-remembered lullaby from childhood. We crested the rise, and I caught my first glimpse of the Triad stones. 3 massive monoliths, each twice the height of a man, stood in a perfect triangle in the center of a moonlit clearing. Ancient symbols were carved into their weathered surfaces, barely visible with time's erosion. The ground around them was bare of vegetation in a perfect circle, as though nothing dared to grow too close to whatever power resided there. The sight sent a shiver through me that had nothing to do with the night's chill. This place was old, far older than our pack, older perhaps than the concept of territories and boundaries altogether. It's wrong, I whispered, the words escaping before I could consider them. Something's been done to the stones. Orion glanced at me sharply. What do you mean? I struggled to articulate what I sensed. The symbols. They've been altered. Recently, I pointed to the nearest stone. There and there. New markings carved over the old. Dominic frowned, squinting into the darkness. I see nothing, but Orion's expression had grown grave. You're certain? I nodded. Whatever power these stones held has been redirected, corrupted. A twig snapped somewhere in the darkness beyond the clearing. Every warrior tensed, hands moving to weapons. Orion's arm shot out protectively in front of me, pushing me slightly behind him. Wait, he commanded in a barely audible whisper. For several heartbeats, nothing moved. Then, from the opposite side of the clearing, a figure emerged into the moonlight. He, for it appeared male in form, moved with unnatural grace, gliding rather than walking across the bare ground toward the central stone. Tall and lean, dressed in elegant dark clothing that belonged in a noble's court rather than a forest, he might have been handsome if not for the predatory stillness in his bearing. His skin was so pale it seemed to absorb the moonlight rather than reflect it. A vampire, just as I had seen in my vision. Behind him, 2 more figures materialized from the darkness. A woman with hair like spun silver, and another man, broader than the first, with an intricate pattern of scars visible even at this distance across the left side of his face. Right on time, the first vampire said, his voice carrying easily across the clearing, though he hadn't raised it. Though I expected wolves, not humans playing at stealth, his gaze swept the tree line, pausing exactly where we crouched in shadow. Come out, Alpha King. Your heartbeat betrays you. Orion's muscles tensed beside me. After a moment's hesitation, he stood, stepping forward into the moonlight at the edge of the clearing. I rose with him, staying half hidden behind his broader form. Corvus, Orion acknowledged, surprising me with his recognition. I thought our kinds had an understanding. The vampire, Corvus, smiled, revealing teeth too sharp to be human. Agreements change with circumstances, Wolf King, especially when one party grows hungry. The Northern Ridge Scout, Orion said flatly. That was your work. A necessity, Corvus replied with a dismissive wave. He stumbled upon our little project before its completion. Now that you're here, I suppose explanations are in order. Starting with why you're desecrating sacred ground, Dominic growled, stepping forward to flank Orion. The female vampire laughed, the sound like glass breaking. Sacred to whom? These stones stood centuries before your kind claimed this territory. They belong to older powers we're simply reclaiming. Corvus's gaze shifted, focusing suddenly on me with such intensity that I had to force myself not to step back. You brought a seer, he said, something like surprise coloring his tone. How unexpected. Orion's body language changed subtly, becoming more protective. My pack, my business, he said curtly. What do you want with the stones, Corvus? Want? Nothing so simple as want. The vampire moved to the nearest stone, trailing his fingers across its surface with something like reverence. Need, perhaps. These stones mark one of the thin places between worlds. We're merely widening the gap. To what purpose? Orion demanded. Survival. For the first time, Corvus's urbane manner slipped, revealing something desperate beneath. Our kind dwindles. The old feeding grounds are gone, developed by humans with their technology and their endless expansion. We need new hunting territories. Not here. Orion's voice dropped to a dangerous register. Not my pack. The scarred vampire finally spoke, his voice guttural compared to Corvus's cultured tones. All territories will be hunting grounds once the gateway opens. The old ones will return, and this time, they won't be constrained by sunlight or stakes or any of the weaknesses that have kept our kind in check. A chill ran down my spine. Whatever they were attempting was far more dangerous than simple trespassing or treaty violation. The symbols, I whispered to Orion. They're creating a portal of some kind. Corvus's head tilted, his unnaturally acute hearing catching my words. The little seer understands. Perhaps she's more valuable than she appears. His smile widened. Bring her to me, Wolf King, and perhaps your pack might be spared when the old ones return. No. Orion's response was immediate and absolute. One hand reached back to grasp mine, squeezing it once in what felt like reassurance. The atmosphere shifted, tension coiling like a serpent about to strike. The female vampire moved to one side, the scarred one to the other, creating a loose circle around us. Behind us, I could sense Orion's warriors tensing for battle. Then we take her, Corvus said simply. Everything happened at once. The vampires moved with blinding speed. Orion shouted a command, and his warriors surged forward. The clearing erupted into chaos, snarls and screams, and the clash of weapons against unnaturally hard flesh. Orion pushed me roughly behind him. Run, he ordered. Back to the camp, now! But my feet wouldn't move. Something was happening to the stones. The newly carved symbols had begun to glow with an eerie blue light that pulsed like a heartbeat. The air between them wavered, as though viewed through heat rising from summer-baked earth. The portal, I gasped. They've already started it. Corvus had reached the center stone, one hand pressed against a central symbol that burned brighter than the others. Words in a language I didn't recognize poured from his lips, ancient and terrible. Without conscious thought, I found myself moving forward, drawn by an instinct deeper than fear. My pendant burned against my skin, growing hotter with each step I took toward the stones. Cora! Orion's voice called from what seemed a great distance, though he was only steps behind me. Stop! I couldn't have stopped if I wanted to. The pendant pulled me forward like a lodestone to true north. As I approached, Corvus's chanting faltered, his eyes widening as they fixed on me. No, on the pendant that had somehow worked its way free of my tunic and now glowed with the same blue light as the stones. Moon touched, he hissed, recognition and fear mingling in his voice. Impossible. I reached the edge of the bare circle surrounding the stones. The moment my foot crossed the boundary, the ground beneath me trembled. The blue light flared painfully bright, then began to shift, deepening to a silvery white that reminded me of moonlight on snow. Stop her! Corvus shouted to his companions. The female vampire lunged toward me, inhumanly fast. But before she could reach me, Orion was there, intercepting her with a roar that shook the clearing. In a blur of movement too fast for my eyes to track, he shifted, massive black wolf where man had stood, and tore into the vampire with savage fury. Dominic and the other warriors followed their alpha's lead, shifting forms to engage the enemy. The night filled with snarls and unearthly shrieks as wolf teeth met vampire flesh. I continued forward, moving as though in a trance. Each step closer to the center stone felt like pushing against a current. Yet the pendant pulled me onward, growing hotter against my skin until it should have burned, though somehow it didn't. Corvus abandoned the stone, turning his attention fully to me. What are you? He demanded, circling warily. You're no ordinary wolf kind. I don't know. I answered truthfully, my voice sounding strange to my own ears, stronger, more certain than I had ever heard it. The scarred vampire appeared suddenly beside Corvus, bleeding from multiple wounds but still moving with lethal grace. Kill her, he urged. The gateway is destabilizing. Indeed, the air between the stones had begun to ripple violently, the blue light fighting against the spreading silver. Discordant whispers emanated from the wavering air, voices speaking in languages no human tongue had uttered for millennia. Corvus launched himself at me with supernatural speed. I should have died in that moment, would have, if not for what happened next. The pendant at my throat exploded with brilliant white light. I felt something unfurl within me, something that had lain dormant my entire life, waiting for this precise moment to awaken. Power surged through my veins, electric and ancient and somehow familiar, like returning to a home I'd never known I had. My hand rose of its own accord, palm facing outward toward the charging vampire. Words I didn't recognize spilled from my lips, yet I understood their meaning perfectly. A command for light to repel darkness, for balance to be restored. The force that burst from my palm was pure moonlight given physical form. It struck Corvus square in the chest, halting his advance as effectively as a solid wall. He screamed, a sound of equal parts rage and agony, as silver light spread across his skin like frost across a window pane, crystallizing as it moved. The scarred vampire backed away, horror contorting his features. "What have you done?" he snarled at Corvus. "You said nothing of a lunar priestess." "There are none left," Corvus hissed, still struggling against the advancing crystallization of his body. "They were hunted to extinction centuries ago." I stepped forward, drawn now to the center stone, not by the pendant's pull, but by instinct. My hand, still glowing with that strange silver light, reached out to touch the corrupted symbol Corvus had activated. The moment my fingers made contact, visions exploded behind my eyes. My mother, standing in this very spot, pendant glowing against her throat. The last of her line, guardian of a power older than wolf kind or vampire kind. A power tied to the moon itself, to balance, to the thin places between worlds that must be protected, not exploited. Her choice to bear a child, me, within a wolf pack for protection. Her departure when signs of my awakening power began to show, drawing danger away from me until I was ready. And older memories, not my own, but inherited through blood and magic. Women with fair hair and moon-blessed power, standing as guardians at crossroads between realms for countless generations. Neither human nor wolf nor vampire, but something else entirely, keepers of balance in a world constantly threatened by forces seeking to upset it. I gasped as the visions released me, stumbling back a step. The corrupted symbols beneath my touch had changed, reverting to their original form. Ancient runes of protection and boundary, not gateway and invasion. The wavering air between the stones stabilized, the unnatural blue light fading entirely as silver-white illumination spread across the monolith's surfaces. The whispers from beyond ceased, replaced by a single clear note that rang through the clearing like a bell. Corvus, now almost entirely crystallized, gave one final agonized scream before his form shattered into countless glittering fragments that dissolved into the night air. The scarred vampire turned to flee, but Orion, massive black wolf form bleeding from multiple wounds but still terrifyingly powerful, intercepted him at the edge of the clearing, powerful jaws closing around his throat in a killing blow. The female vampire was nowhere to be seen, either escaped or already destroyed by the pack warriors, who now stood in a protective circle around the clearing, some still in wolf form, others having shifted back to human. Silence fell. The frantic energy of battle gave way to an almost sacred stillness, as the stones continued to glow with gentle silver light. I stood at their center, power still humming through my veins, understanding finally blooming in my mind. I wasn't broken. I wasn't less than. I was simply something else entirely. Something rare and necessary in a world of careful balances. Heavy footfalls approached from behind. I turned to see Orion, shifted back to human form, walking toward me with an expression I couldn't interpret. Blood stained his skin from various wounds, yet he moved with purpose, his amber eyes never leaving mine. "You knew," I said quietly as he reached me. "You knew what I was." "I suspected," he corrected, stopping just short of touching me. "When I found your mother's pendant among her abandoned possessions, I recognized the symbol from ancient pack records, but I couldn't be certain until tonight." "Why didn't you tell me?" His expression softened slightly. "Would you have believed me? That you, who had spent a lifetime believing yourself deficient, were actually born to power older than the pack itself? I considered this, and found truth in his words. I wouldn't have believed it, not without seeing it, feeling it, as I had tonight. What happens now? I asked, suddenly aware that every wolf in the clearing was watching us, Dominic chief among them, with an expression of stunned disbelief. Orion's gaze traveled to the still glowing stones, then back to my face. Now, he said, his voice low but carrying in the still night air. We begin again, with truth, not assumption. He extended his hand to me, not a command this time, but an invitation. If you're willing. I looked at his outstretched hand. Then at the pendant that had led me to this moment of revelation. The silver light had faded from my skin, but the power it had awakened remained, humming just beneath the surface, waiting to be understood and mastered. With a deep breath, I placed my hand in his. Dawn broke over the forest with gentle insistence, bathing the triad stones in pale golden light. The silver glow had faded with the night, but the stones remained transformed, cleansed of the vampire's corruption and restored to their original purpose. Our party had made camp at the edge of the clearing, tending wounds and maintaining a vigilant watch through what remained of the night. I sat alone by one of the smaller fires, turning my mother's pendant over in my hands. It looked ordinary now, a simple crescent of silver on a chain, with no hint of the power it had channeled hours before. Yet I could still feel the echo of that power within me, like the lingering vibration of a bell, long after it has been struck. You should eat something. I looked up to find Elise approaching with a bowl of something steaming. She had arrived with the second half of our party shortly after the battle, bringing supplies and assistance for the wounded. Thank you, I murmured, accepting the offering. Simple porridge, but the warmth was welcome against the morning chill. She settled beside me, her eyes darting to the pendant in my lap. So it's true, she said quietly. What they're saying. I raised an eyebrow. And what exactly are they saying? That you're a lunar priestess, that you destroyed a vampire with a touch and stopped some kind of portal from opening. Her voice held wonder rather than skepticism. That you're not what any of us thought you were. Including myself, I added wryly, spooning porridge into my mouth to avoid further explanation. I wasn't ready to discuss what had happened, not until I'd had more time to process it myself. Elise seemed to understand my reluctance, changing the subject with graceful ease. The king has been in council with Dominic and the senior warriors since first light. They're discussing what to do about the Eastern Valley and Northern Ridge packs. Why? What do they have to do with this? The vampires crossed their territories to reach ours, she explained. Either their alphas were complicit, or they were unaware of the threat within their own borders. Neither possibility speaks well of their leadership. I considered this. Pack politics had always seemed distant from my life as an outcast healer's apprentice, but now I found myself thrust into their center. What will happen? Elise shrugged. That depends on King Orion, and perhaps on you. Before I could question her further, the subject of our conversation emerged from the largest tent at the edge of the clearing. King Orion moved with the contained power of a predator, despite the bandages visible beneath his loose shirt. The wounds he had sustained during the battle would have incapacitated an ordinary wolf, but he showed little sign of discomfort as he scanned the camp, his gaze eventually landing on me. Elise rose immediately. I should check on the wounded, she murmured, squeezing my shoulder briefly before departing with a respectful nod to her alpha as he approached. I remained seated, suddenly uncertain of the protocol for this situation. Last night, in the aftermath of battle and revelation, things had seemed clearer. But by daylight, doubts crept in like morning mist. What place could a lunar priestess, if that's truly what I was, have in a wolf pack? What did Orion expect of me now? He lowered himself beside me with controlled grace, his larger frame making the log we shared seem small. For several moments, he said nothing, staring into the flames with an intensity that suggested his thoughts were far away. How are your wounds? I finally asked, breaking the silence. His lips quirked slightly. Healing. Our kind recovers quickly. Our kind, I echoed. Am I still included in that category? His amber eyes shifted to me, studying my face with disconcerting thoroughness. You were never entirely of our kind, Cora, but you have always been part of our pack. That hasn't changed. Hasn't it? I gestured vaguely toward the stones. After what happened last night, what I did, what I am, you saved us, he said simply. Without your intervention, the vampires would have opened a gateway that could have destroyed not just our pack, but many others. It wasn't really me, I admitted. It was this power inside me. This inheritance I never knew about until it exploded out of me. Orion's expression softened slightly. The power may have been inherited, but the courage to use it was yours alone. He reached out, his fingers brushing against the pendant that now lay against my tunic once more. Your mother knew what you would become. She left this with you as both protection and guide. The mention of my mother sparked both longing and resentment. Why did she leave? If she knew what I was, why not stay and teach me? To protect you, he said, his voice gentler than I had ever heard it. The last of the lunar priestesses were hunted nearly to extinction centuries ago. By vampires, by dark witches, by others who coveted their power. By concealing your nature, by leaving you within the protection of a strong pack while drawing attention to herself elsewhere, she gave you the chance to grow into your power undetected. You seem to know a great deal about it, I observed, unable to keep a hint of accusation from my tone. He didn't flinch from it. After your mother left, I found journals among her possessions, records of lunar priestess history and traditions. I've spent years piecing together what they meant, suspecting but never certain that you were what she implied. His gaze held mine steadily. I couldn't tell you what I wasn't sure of myself, and if I was right, revealing your nature too soon might have put you in danger before you were ready to defend yourself. I absorbed this, torn between understanding and lingering hurt. So what happens now? Now we return to our territory with news of what transpired here. I've sent messengers to the Eastern Valley and Northern Ridge Alphas, demanding counsel. His voice took on the authoritative edge of leadership once more. They must be warned about the vampire threat, even if it's been temporarily neutralized. And me? What am I supposed to do with this? I gestured to myself, to the power that still hummed beneath my skin, unfamiliar and unpredictable. Something that might have been a smile touched his lips. Learn to control it. Understand it. Your mother's journals contain exercises, meditations, techniques passed down through generations of lunar priestesses. I've kept them safe, waiting for this moment. The realization that he had preserved this connection to my heritage, this key to understanding myself, struck me deeply. Why? I asked softly. Why protect me all these years when I was nothing but an outcast who couldn't even shift? His gaze turned distant. When I became Alpha after my father's death, I swore to protect every member of this pack, not just the strongest or the most useful, but every soul under my care. He looked back at me, something unreadable flickering in his eyes. And perhaps I understood what it meant to be different, to bear a weight others couldn't see or understand. Before I could question this unexpected glimpse of vulnerability, Dominic approached, his expression grave. My king, he said with a respectful inclination of his head. The scouts have returned from the northern perimeter. There's movement in the forest beyond our territory. Large groups traveling south. Orion rose immediately, all trace of personal conversation vanishing behind the mask of leadership. The Northern Ridge Pack? No, Dominic said grimly. Humans. Armed hunting parties, moving with purpose. A cold weight settled in my stomach. They're hunting vampires, I said. The realization crystal clear, though I couldn't have explained how I knew. The deaths of the scouts must have drawn their attention. Both men looked at me with surprise. How can you be certain? Dominic asked, suspicion edging his tone. I touched the pendant absently. I just know, the same way I knew about the stones. I met Orion's gaze. They don't understand what they're hunting. They'll be slaughtered, and any wolves they encounter might be caught in the crossfire. Orion's expression hardened with decision. Break camp. We leave within the hour. He turned to Dominic. Send scouts ahead to warn any pack members near the northern borders to retreat immediately. No one is to engage either the humans or any vampires they may be pursuing." As Dominic strode away to relay the orders, Orion turned back to me. "Stay close during the journey home. If you sense anything at all, tell me immediately." I nodded, rising to gather my few possessions. As I moved toward the tent I'd been assigned, I felt the weight of many eyes upon me, some curious, others wary, a few openly hostile. My status within the pack had been complicated enough as an outcast who couldn't shift. Now, as something else entirely. Something powerful but unfamiliar. Those complications had only multiplied. The journey back to the pack's central village was markedly different from our outward trip. We traveled faster, with greater urgency, stopping only when absolutely necessary for rest. Again I rode with Orion, but this time the silence between us held a different quality. Not tense, exactly, but heavy with unspoken questions and possibilities. We reached the village as the sun was setting on the second day. News of our return, and rumors of what had transpired at the Triad Stones, had clearly preceded us. The entire pack seemed to have gathered in the central square, their expressions ranging from relief to curiosity to outright suspicion as our party rode in. Orion dismounted first, then reached up to help me down. His hands at my waist lingered a moment longer than necessary, a steadying presence before we faced the sea of expectant faces. "My alpha." Old Mara stepped forward from the crowd, her ancient face creased with concern. "Is it true? About the girl?" I stiffened at being discussed as though I weren't present, but Orion's hand at the small of my back kept me grounded. "Cora is a lunar priestess," he confirmed, his voice carrying across the gathered pack members. "She has awakened to her power and used it to save our territory from a vampire threat." A murmur rippled through the crowd, shock, disbelief, and something like awe mingling in the collective response. "But she can't shift," someone called out. "How can she be part of our pack if she isn't wolf?" "The lunar priestesses have been allies to wolfkind for millennia," Orion responded, his tone brooking no argument. "Their bloodline is ancient and powerful. A different kind of strength, but strength nonetheless. Cora was born among us, raised among us, and has risked her life for us. She is pack." His unequivocal declaration silenced further questions, at least for the moment. With a few more words of reassurance to the gathered wolves, he dismissed them back to their duties, promising a full council meeting the following day to discuss the implications of what had transpired. As the crowd dispersed, Orion turned to me. "You'll stay in the pack house tonight," he said. "Your old quarters are no longer suitable." "Because of what I am now?" I asked, unable to keep a hint of bitterness from my voice. His expression softened marginally. "Because of the target you may have become. Until we understand the full implications of what happened at the Stones, your safety is paramount." I wanted to argue that I'd managed my own safety for 22 years, but exhaustion weighed too heavily on my shoulders. With a nod of acquiescence, I followed him toward the pack house, the large stately building at the village center that housed the Alpha, his closest advisors, and distinguished guests. To my surprise, he led me not to the guest quarters I had occupied before our departure, but to a suite of rooms in the eastern wing of the house. Closer to his own chambers, I realized with a jolt of awareness. "These were your mother's rooms," he explained as he opened the door, revealing a spacious sitting area with doors leading to what appeared to be a bedroom and private bathing chamber beyond. "I thought you might find comfort in being surrounded by her things." I stepped inside, momentarily speechless. The space was beautiful, comfortable yet elegant, with large windows overlooking the forest beyond the village. Bookshelves lined one wall, filled with volumes whose spines spoke of herbalism, astronomy, ancient histories, and more esoteric subjects. "Her journals are there," Orion said, pointing to a wooden chest beneath one window. "I had them brought here after we confirmed what you are. Everything she left behind is yours now." The gesture overwhelmed me. After years of existing on the margins of pack life, in a humble hut with minimal possessions, to be given this connection to my mother, this acknowledgement of my heritage, was more than I had ever expected. "Thank you," I managed, my voice thick with emotion I couldn't quite name. He nodded, his amber eyes warm in the fading light. "Rest tonight. Tomorrow will bring challenges enough." As he turned to leave, I found myself reaching out, catching his wrist. He stilled immediately, his gaze dropping to where my fingers encircled his forearm. "Why did you really bring me on the journey to the stones?" I asked. The question that had burned within me since that first summons finally finding voice. "You could have simply asked me to touch the metal fragment, to tell you what I saw. You didn't need me there." For a long moment he said nothing, his expression unreadable. Then, very deliberately, he turned his hand until his fingers intertwined with mine. "Perhaps I needed to see for myself what you would become," he said finally, his voice low. "Perhaps I needed to be there when you discovered your true nature, to ensure that you understood your places here. With the pack." His thumb brushed across my knuckles in a gesture so gentle it made my breath catch. "With me." Before I could respond, before I could even fully process the implication of his words, he released my hand and stepped back. "Tomorrow," he said, the single word somehow both a promise and a farewell. And then he was gone, leaving me alone with my mother's legacy, and the dawning realization that my relationship with the Alpha King had shifted into territory as unknown and potentially transformative as my newly awakened power. Word count: 2,303 words. Tentar novamente amauk. Thank you for your approval. I'll now continue with the final Block 5 of the story, providing a complete conclusion to the narrative. Block 5. Sleep eluded me that night despite my exhaustion. I spent hours poring over my mother's journals by lamplight, absorbing her elegant script that detailed the history and practices of the lunar priestesses. The revelations were both illuminating and overwhelming. Generations of women who had served as guardians of the boundary between worlds, wielding power drawn from the moon itself to maintain balance in places where different realms touched. My inability to shift suddenly made perfect sense. I had never been meant to take wolf form, because I wasn't truly wolf-kind. The lunar priestess bloodline was something separate, something that had occasionally aligned itself with wolf packs for mutual protection, but remained distinct in its purpose and abilities. Dawn was breaking when I finally closed the last journal, my mind swimming with new knowledge and techniques I would need to master. I moved to the window, watching as golden light spilled across the village, transforming the mundane into something briefly magical. A soft knock at my door roused me from contemplation. "Enter," I called, expecting perhaps a servant with breakfast. Instead, Elise appeared, her expression a mixture of excitement and concern. "The Eastern Valley Alpha has arrived," she announced without preamble. "And he's brought his son." I frowned, not immediately grasping the significance. "Is that unusual?" "His son, Cora," she emphasized. "Nathaniel. They say he's being offered as a potential mate for you." The statement was so unexpected I could only stare at her in confusion. "A mate? For me? That's absurd." Elise shook her head. "Not anymore. You're a lunar priestess, rare, powerful, valuable. Any pack would consider it an honor to align themselves with your bloodline." She stepped closer, lowering her voice though we were alone. "The council meeting is in an hour. King Orion is not pleased with this development." A complicated emotion I couldn't quite name stirred within me at the mention of Orion's displeasure. Why would he care who is offered as my mate? Elise gave me a look that suggested I was being deliberately obtuse. "Because of what happened at the Triad Stones. Because of how he defended you before the pack yesterday." She tilted her head, studying me. "Because of how he looks at you when he thinks no one notices." Heat rushed to my face. I turned back to the window, unwilling to let her see how her words affected me. "He sees me as an asset to the pack, nothing more. If you believe that, you're not nearly as perceptive as a lunar priestess should be," she said with gentle reproach. After a moment, she added, "You should prepare for the council. Wear this." She laid a garment across the bed, a dress of pale silver blue that shimmered subtly in the morning light. "It was your mother's," she explained. "For ceremonies and important occasions, it seemed fitting." After she left, I approached the dress with something like reverence. The fabric was unlike anything I'd ever worn, lighter than it appeared, with an otherworldly quality that seemed to capture and hold the light. When I slipped it on, it fit as though made for me, draping elegantly to accentuate my height and the subtle curves I usually concealed beneath practical clothing. I secured my mother's pendant around my neck, its silver crescent resting against my collarbone, and braided my fair hair in a more elaborate style than my usual simple plait. The woman who gazed back at me from the small mirror above the washing basin looked like a stranger. Someone regal and composed, not the outcast healer's apprentice I had been just days ago. The council chamber occupied the largest room in the pack house, a circular space with a vaulted ceiling and windows placed to catch the maximum amount of natural light. When I entered, conversations immediately stuttered to silence as all eyes turned to me. The room was arranged with a large round table at its center, around which sat King Orion, Dominic, Old Mara, and several other high-ranking pack members. Also present were two strangers, a middle-aged man with steel-gray hair and sharp features who could only be the Eastern Valley Alpha, and a younger man who shared his coloring but possessed a softer, more scholarly air. Orion rose as I entered, his expression carefully neutral, though I detected a flicker of something warmer in his eyes as he took in my appearance. "Cora," he said formally, "join us." He gestured to an empty chair, not at the periphery where guests might sit, but directly to his right, a position of honor that caused several council members to exchange glances. As I moved to take the seat, I caught Dominic's eye. To my surprise, the usual disdain in his expression had been replaced by something more complex, a grudging respect perhaps, or at least a reevaluation of my place in the pack hierarchy. "Alpha Thorncrest," Orion continued once I was seated, turning to the older visitor. "May I present Cora, lunar priestess and member of our pack." The Eastern Valley Alpha inclined his head, studying me with undisguised interest. "So the rumors are true," he said, his voice smooth as polished stone. "A lunar priestess awakens in our time. My pack is honored to bear witness, as is my son Nathaniel," he added, gesturing to the younger man, who offered me a smile that seemed genuinely warm rather than calculating. "The honor is mine," I responded, finding confidence in the formal rhythm of the exchange. Orion reclaimed control of the conversation with subtle authority, steering it toward the purpose of the council. "We have confirmed that vampires attempted to corrupt the Triad Stones to open a gateway between realms. The immediate threat has been neutralized, but questions remain about how they crossed pack territories undetected." Alpha Thorncrest bristled slightly. "If you're suggesting negligence on my part, I suggest nothing," Orion interrupted smoothly. "I seek understanding of how 3 vampires traversed your lands without raising alarm, the same way they likely crossed yours before reaching the stones," Thorncrest countered. "With stealth and supernatural abilities that can evade even wolf senses." His gaze shifted to me. Had we possessed a lunar priestess in our pack, perhaps we might have detected them sooner. The implication hung in the air, causing Orion's jaw to tighten almost imperceptibly. "Which brings me to the purpose of our visit," Thorncrest continued. "In the interest of strengthening the alliance between our packs and ensuring both territories are better protected against future threats, I propose a union between my son Nathaniel and your lunar priestess." Though Elise had warned me this was coming, hearing it stated so directly in formal council sent a jolt through me. I kept my expression neutral with effort, aware of the many eyes watching for my reaction. "Cora is not a bargaining chip to be offered in alliance negotiations," Orion said, his tone deceptively mild, though I could sense the tension beneath it. "She is a valued member of this pack, with the right to determine her own future." "Of course," Thorncrest agreed smoothly. "I merely suggest she consider the advantages of such a union. My son is accomplished, respected, and would make an excellent partner for one with such unique abilities." Nathaniel shifted uncomfortably at being discussed in such terms, shooting me an apologetic glance. "The Northern Ridge Alpha arrives tomorrow," Dominic interjected, his tone deliberately neutral. "I understand he brings a similar proposal." My fingers tightened around the pendant at my throat. In the space of days, I had gone from pack outcast to apparently highly desirable political alliance. The irony might have been amusing if it weren't so overwhelming. "Perhaps," Old Mara spoke for the first time, her ancient voice commanding attention despite its frailty, "we should hear from the lunar priestess herself. It is her future we discuss so freely." All eyes turned to me. In the sudden silence, I could hear the distant sounds of the village, children laughing, hammers striking at the blacksmith's forge, life continuing as it always had while my world transformed around me. I am honored by Alpha Thorncrest's proposal, I began carefully, choosing each word with deliberation. But I have only just discovered my heritage, my abilities. There is much I must learn before I could consider binding myself to any mate, regardless of which pack they belong to. Thorncrest frowned, clearly displeased with my response, but his son surprised me by nodding with what appeared to be genuine understanding. A wise approach, Nathaniel said, speaking for the first time. His voice was gentler than his father's, with an intellectual quality that suggested he valued thought over action. Power such as yours requires mastery before such life-altering decisions can be made. His father shot him a look of barely concealed annoyance before smoothing his expression once more. Of course, we would not rush such an important decision. Perhaps a period of courtship would be appropriate to allow you to become acquainted with my son while you continue your studies. Before I could respond, Orion rose to his feet, his movement so sudden that everyone at the table tensed. The council will recess until this afternoon, he announced, brooking no argument. Alpha Thorncrest, you and your son are welcome to refresh yourselves after your journey. Dominic will show you to your quarters. The dismissal was clear. After a moment of tense silence, Thorncrest inclined his head in reluctant acquiescence. As the council members filed out, Orion caught my eye with a subtle gesture that indicated I should remain. When the chamber had emptied, he closed the heavy wooden door and turned to me, his expression finally revealing the tension he had controlled during the council. You don't have to consider his proposal, he said without preamble, moving to stand before me, or any proposal that may come from the Northern Ridge Alpha tomorrow. I know, I replied, studying his face. I meant what I said about needing time to understand what I've become. He nodded, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. Your mother's journals will help, but practical instruction would be better. There may be other lunar priestesses in hiding. Once things settle here, we can search for them. We? I echoed, the single word carrying a wealth of questions. Orion's gaze intensified, fixing on me with that predator focus I had come to associate with him. Did you think I would send you away to seek your kind alone? You are under my protection, Cora. Is that all I am to you? The question escaped before wisdom could contain it. Someone to protect, like any other pack member? He stepped closer, close enough that I had to tilt my head back to maintain eye contact. You know it isn't. Then tell me, I challenged, newfound confidence surging through me. Tell me what I am to the Alpha King. For a heartbeat, he remained silent, searching my face as though looking for something crucial. Then, with deliberate slowness, he raised a hand to my cheek, his palm warm against my skin. You are the moon to my darkness, he said, his voice low and intense. The light that balances the predator, the power that complements my own. My breath caught at the raw honesty in his words, in his eyes. Why did you never speak of this before? What could I have offered an outcast healer's apprentice who already suffered enough scrutiny? He asked, a hint of old pain shadowing his expression. More attention from a position that would only make your life more difficult, and later, when I suspected what you truly were, I needed to be certain before I revealed my feelings. And now? I whispered. Now I find myself in the position of fighting other alphas for your attention, he said with a flash of that predatory intensity. Something I never anticipated. I couldn't help but smile at the irony. The Alpha King, jealous of a scholarly wolf from another pack. Not jealous, he corrected, his hand sliding from my cheek to the nape of my neck in a touch that sent warmth cascading down my spine. Territorial, perhaps. Protective, certainly. But mostly determined. To claim me as your mate? I asked boldly, needing the clarity of direct words. His amber eyes darkened. To earn the right to stand at your side, not as your protector or your alpha, but as your equal, your partner. The sincerity in his voice, in his eyes, touched something deep within me, a longing I had suppressed for so long I had almost forgotten it existed. The longing to belong, not as a tolerated outsider, but as someone cherished for exactly who and what she was. And if I need time, I asked, needing to be certain this wasn't just another form of claiming or control. "Then you shall have it," he replied without hesitation. "I have waited a decade to understand what drew me to you from the moment you came of age. I can wait longer for you to choose your path freely." The generosity of this response, from a man accustomed to command, to having his every wish immediately fulfilled, moved me deeply. I lifted my hand to cover his where it still rested against my neck. "Thank you," I said simply. A sound at the door broke the intimate moment between us. Dominic entered without knocking, his expression grave. "My king," he said, then paused as he took in our proximity. For once, his customary disapproval was absent. "Forgive the interruption, but scouts report multiple vampires moving through the northern forests, and human hunters close behind them." Orion dropped his hand from my neck, but remained close. "How many?" "At least 5 vampires, perhaps more. A dozen hunters. They're fleeing," I said with sudden certainty, the knowledge rising from that place of intuition I was only beginning to understand. The destruction of their attempt at the Triad Stones has sent them into a panic. "They're running from something, or to something," Orion countered grimly. "Gather the elite warriors," he instructed Dominic. "We intercept them before they reach the village." As Dominic departed, Orion turned back to me. "Stay within the pack house. You'll be safe here." "No," I said firmly, my hand rising to the pendant at my throat. "If these vampires are connected to what happened at the stones, my abilities may be needed. I'm coming with you." He looked ready to argue, then studied my expression, and apparently thought better of it. "Very well. But you stay behind our defensive line at all times. You are not to engage directly unless absolutely necessary." Within the hour, a group of 20 elite warriors, led by Orion and Dominic, departed the village. I rode once more with Orion, but this time I felt like a participant in the mission rather than a passenger. The knowledge gleaned from my mother's journals gave me a clearer sense of my capabilities, even if I hadn't yet had time to practice them deliberately. We intercepted the fleeing vampires at a narrow ravine several miles north of the village. The creatures moved with unnatural speed, but the advantage of our scouts had allowed us to position ourselves in their path. As we took up position along the ridgeline, I could see them below. 5 pale figures moving like shadows beneath the canopy of trees. "They've sensed us," Dominic muttered as the vampires suddenly halted, faces turning upward toward our position. "Good," Orion replied grimly. "Let them come to us." The confrontation happened with bewildering speed. One moment the vampires were at the bottom of the ravine. The next, they were surging up the slope toward us with inhuman velocity. The wolf warriors shifted forms in a synchronized wave of transformation that never ceased to awe me, even now that I understood why I could not join them. What followed was chaos, snarls and unearthly shrieks, the flash of teeth and claws, bodies moving almost too quickly for human eyes to track. I remained behind the defensive line as promised, but kept my hand on my pendant, ready to call upon its power if needed. The battle seemed evenly matched at first, but then more pale figures appeared from the trees, reinforcements for the vampires that our scouts had somehow missed. The newcomers attacked from the flank, catching several warriors unprepared. I saw Orion, massive black wolf form unmistakable even in the confusion of combat, surrounded by 3 vampires who coordinated their attacks with lethal precision. Though he fought with incredible strength and skill, even an alpha had limitations. Without conscious thought, I stepped forward, the pendant at my throat beginning to glow with that same silver light I had channeled at the Triad Stones. Words in an ancient language I somehow understood rose to my lips. A summoning of moonlight even in daylight, of balance against chaos, of protection against harm. Power surged through me, more controlled this time as I directed it with deliberate intent. Silver light extended from my outstretched hands, forming a shimmering barrier between Orion and his attackers. The vampires recoiled from it as though burned, giving him the moment he needed to regain advantage. With renewed strength, he tore into the nearest vampire, powerful jaws closing on its throat. The others retreated a step, reassessing their strategy now that I had revealed my capabilities. The battle's momentum shifted, protected by my barriers and emboldened by the tangible evidence of my power. The wolf warriors pressed their advantage. Vampires fell one by one, their bodies crystallizing as they had at the Triad Stones before dissolving into nothingness. Victory seemed certain until a piercing whistle cut through the din of battle. The remaining vampires immediately disengaged, retreating with supernatural speed to regroup around a new figure who had appeared at the edge of the ravine, a tall woman with hair like spun gold and eyes that glowed an unnatural blue even at this distance. "Lunar Priestess," she called, her voice carrying easily across the distance between us. "We need not be enemies." The wolf warriors maintained defensive positions, awaiting Orion's command. He had shifted back to human form, standing protectively near me, though careful not to interfere with the silver light still emanating from my hands. "Your kind tried to corrupt the Triad Stones," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. "You killed innocent wolves and sought to open a gateway that would have brought destruction to these lands." "Desperation drives us to extremes," she responded. "Our kind dwindles while humans multiply and encroach upon our ancient hunting grounds. We sought a solution, nothing more. At the expense of every other species that inhabits these lands," Orion said, his voice hard with controlled anger. "Your solution would have upset the balance between realms that has existed for millennia." The vampire woman's gaze shifted to him, cold assessment in her inhuman eyes. "Says the wolf, who would claim a lunar priestess as mate to increase his own power." I felt rather than saw Orion tense beside me. "I claim nothing," he said evenly. "Cora chooses her own path." Something like surprise flickered across the vampire's face before her expression smoothed once more. "Perhaps you are not what we assumed, Wolf King." Her attention returned to me. "The old agreements between our kinds can be renewed, Priestess. We need not remain enemies when a common threat approaches." "What common threat?" I asked, the silver light dimming slightly as curiosity tempered my defensive stance. "Listen," she said simply. In the sudden silence, a new sound became apparent, the crashing of multiple bodies through undergrowth, the distinctive metal clink of weapons, voices calling to each other in pursuit. The human hunters were closing in. "They hunt us all," the vampire woman said. "To them, any supernatural creature is a monster to be destroyed. They do not distinguish between vampire, wolf, or lunar priestess. You led them here," Dominic accused, having shifted back to human form to join the conversation. She inclined her head in acknowledgement. "Not by design, but yes. They have tracked us for days. Now they will find you as well." The implications were clear. If the hunters discovered wolfkind in these forests, the entire pack would be at risk. Centuries of careful secrecy could be undone in a single bloody encounter. Orion's expression hardened with decision. "A temporary truce," he said to the vampire leader, "until the human threat is addressed. Then you and your kind leave our territory and never return." She considered this, then nodded. "Agreed. On the condition that the lunar priestess assists in creating a misdirection to lead the hunters away from both our kinds." All eyes turned to me. The weight of responsibility settled on my shoulders, not just for the pack that had raised me, but for the delicate balance between supernatural beings and humans that had persisted for generations. "I will help," I said after a moment's consideration. "But you must swear to never again attempt to corrupt the thin places between realms. The Triad Stones and places like them must remain as they were intended. Boundaries, not gateways." The vampire woman held my gaze, ancient cunning in her eyes. "By the old magic, I so swear." Power rippled through the air as her oath took hold, a binding more tangible than mere words. What followed was a complex dance of strategy, supernatural abilities, and ancient magic drawn from my newly discovered heritage. Using my power to bend light and create illusions, guided by knowledge that seemed to flow directly from the pendant at my throat, I crafted a false trail that led the hunters miles away from both wolf territory and the vampire's retreat. By nightfall, the crisis had passed. The hunters, believing they had tracked their quarry to a cave system far to the east, had abandoned our forests in favor of easier prey. The vampires, true to their word, had departed our lands after the immediate threat was resolved, though I harbored no illusions about the fragility of our truce. We returned to the village under a full moon that bathed the forest in silver light, not unlike the power I had channeled. As we approached the pack house, Orion drew me aside, leading me to a secluded garden where moonlight filtered through ancient oak branches. "What you did today," he began, then paused, seeming to search for adequate words. "You saved more than just our warriors. You preserved the peace and secrecy our kind depends upon." "Our kinds," I corrected gently. "I may not be Wolf, but this pack is still my home." Something softened in his expression. "Yes, your home, for as long as you wish it to be." I studied him in the moonlight, this powerful alpha who had protected me in his way for years, who had preserved my mother's legacy until I was ready to claim it, who now offered me freedom to choose my own path even if it led away from him. "What if I wish it to be my home forever?" I asked softly. His breath caught visibly. "Cora, I may need time to master what I've become," I continued, taking a step closer to him. "But I don't need time to know where I belong, or with whom." Hope and caution warred in his expression. "The Eastern Valley Alpha's son is not what I want," I interrupted firmly. "You've waited a decade, Orion. Don't make me wait longer for you to understand what I'm telling you." Understanding dawned in his eyes, followed by something fiercer, more primal. In one fluid motion, he closed the distance between us, one hand cupping my cheek while the other settled at the small of my back. "Tell me," he demanded softly. "Leave no room for doubt." I smiled, feeling truly powerful for the first time in my life. Not because of the magic that flowed through my veins, or the ancient legacy I had inherited, but because of the choice I was making freely, with clear eyes and full heart. "I choose you," I said simply. "The alpha to my priestess, the darkness to my light, the balance we create together." His response was immediate and overwhelming, lips claiming mine with a hunger that spoke of years of restraint finally broken. I met his passion with my own, hands sliding into his hair to pull him closer, as the kiss deepened from tentative exploration to profound connection. When we finally broke apart, breathless and transformed, the pendant at my throat glowed softly, not with the fierce power of battle, but with a gentler illumination that seemed to pulse in rhythm with my heartbeat. "A blessing," I whispered, understanding instinctively what it meant. "The moon's blessing on our union." Orion smiled, a true smile that transformed his usually stern features and revealed the man beneath the alpha. "The first of many blessings, I hope," he said, drawing me back into his embrace. In that moment, beneath the full moon that had always called to something deep within my blood, I understood at last what my mother had meant all those years ago. "Remember who you are," she had said, as she'd pressed the pendant into my palm. "Not broken, not less than, not an outcast, but a lunar priestess born to stand in balance with the natural world and all its creatures. And now, against all odds, I had found my perfect counterbalance in the Alpha King, who had seen my value long before I recognized it myself." As his lips found mine once more, sealing our future with wordless promise, I silently thanked my mother for her final gift, not just the pendant that had guided me to my power, but the wisdom to recognize where I truly belonged, here, with him, in perfect, eternal balance.